Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwald. Many religions promote social justice by focusing on alleviating racism, discrimination, and poverty. Often religious organizations attempt to feed the poor or house the homeless. In our community, there are groups focusing on ways to provide affordable housing to families who cannot afford safe and comfortable living situations. My guest today, Dr. Kelly Reed Ashcraft, is here to discuss local efforts to explore affordable housing solutions. Welcome, Kelly.
Oh, thank you so much, Ozzie. It's just a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, thanks for joining us. You're recently retired. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But you were a professor of social work here at ASU. So I thought we might start just by you telling us a little bit about your work in your career here at ASU and what you were able to accomplish while you were here.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, it's such a big part of me and will always be a big part of me. It was interesting. You and I had a conversation a long time ago, and as an undergrad, I had at one point thought about going into religious studies and becoming a pastor. But at that time, I was thinking pastors had to have all the answers, and since then I've learned that they don't. But it didn't feel like the right calling for me. And fortunately, I had an interest in political science and psychology, which managed to get me through my undergraduate studies. And I was working out in Washington, D.C. for the National Conference of State Legislatures. But at the time, I knew I was either going to go the counseling route or I was going to go the law route for politics and policy. But I was having an opportunity to do some volunteer work, and I thought, well, this will help me make a decision about which way my path will go. And so I had an opportunity to work for a National Organization for Victim Assistance, which is NOVA, and works with crime victims from across the country. So I was carrying a pager as a volunteer, answering victim calls. And I also had the opportunity to run what we called our Parents of Murdered Children Anniversary Note project.
Oh my goodness.
It was pretty heavy-duty stuff for a 23-year-old, but it was absolutely touched my heart in terms of working day-to-day, might be taking something up to Congress, going to the legislative office buildings, getting frustrated about trying to pass some legislation. And then I'd go to this volunteer work at NOVA, and I'd have a letter from a parent whose child had been murdered. And because of the way that child died, nobody would talk to them on the anniversary date of the death of their child. So it would just be the most heart-wrenching and beautiful note to thank me for reaching out. So I knew that was my calling. It really was a calling. And the more I talked to people, the more I realized psychology wasn't a really good match. And someone fortunately was in my path and said, Kelly, with your interest in advocacy and social justice, and with your interest in counseling, why aren't you looking at a master's in social work?
Right.
And so fortunately, that got me on my path. And I ended up going to Chapel Hill for my for my graduate degree, and then still was sitting on the fence about whether or not to do what we call direct practice, working directly with individuals and families, or working macro, which means policy, program evaluation, community practice. And went back up to D.C. and started working on federal evaluations with runaway and homeless youth, and traveled around the country getting to actually visit youth and staff at different shelter programs. Loved it. And another person in my path said, Kelly, one of my mentors back at Chapel Hill, he said, I've got the statewide evaluation contract for family preservation services. We're starting that PhD program in social work. Why don't you come back and start working with me as a research associate, and this could be your dissertation. So I just felt like, there definitely were those opportunities and those people in my life that kind of led me to social work, and it's no doubt a calling for me.
It's always fun to look back and see how things fall into place. Sometimes you don't realize it at the time, but
not at all.
Well, you obviously have a compassionate heart, and I think I know the answer to this. But Do you see you talked about your career as a calling? Do you see what you have done in your career and now what you're doing as a kind of outgrowth of your faith, or as a calling of faith? In a sense?
Absolutely, it really is. You know, it was such a match. In fact, you and I have talked before about the code of ethics, social code of ethics. I mean, dignity and worth of the person, importance of relationships, social and racial justice. All of those things are things that are part of my religiosity and part of my spirituality. So it always has been really easy for me because my professional path is part of who I am as a person and part of my spirituality. So it's also just continued to fuel me, and it will continue to do so.
Yeah, and I remember when you were in the process of retiring, you said something like, I feel like there's something else for me to do, and I have to quit work in order to do it. And so maybe you can tell us just a little bit about what you've been. You certainly haven't retired to the golf course or the fishing hole or anything like
Not
that.
at all.
You've been quite busy. So what have you been doing that you see as an outgrowth of your professional life and your faith?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, about 5 years ago, I'd been teaching like you for a number of years, not quite as many as you. I've been here for 23 years. But I started realizing that the community practice work I was doing was becoming much more important to me, and it felt like it was much more integral to making community change. I got involved with an initiative called the Watauga Compassionate Community Initiative, which originally was focused on adverse childhood experiences and how ubiquitous ACEs are in people's lives. But also there's the hope, because there's resiliency. You can have resiliency at the individual level, the family level, or at the community level. And with WCCI, it really was working at the community level. And I became, when we first started, was part of the leadership team and was the data co-lead, and since then I've become the policy co-lead. And we were just the kinds of changes that I was seeing personally as well as professionally in myself as well as in the community, as I started to see organizations become more trauma responsive and resilient and support people in a different way. It started really forcing me to think, you know what, I feel like I can't make the kind of impact that I want to make at this point in time within the confines of the university, and I really want to be all in at this point. And so fortunately had a couple of serious conversations with my spouse and talked about, you know what, we can do this, and you really are having this calling to do something where you get to be all in, focused on the community. So we can go ahead, and why don't you go ahead and leave? Originally, I thought I was just going to leave from the university, but instead, because of the time I had in, I didn't realize that I was eligible for retirement. And so it's been an incredible blessing. I mean, there's really no other way to say that, but a blessing to be privileged enough to be able to take this time and start the next chapter, which is really focused totally on community work.
Well, that's really exciting. I'm really happy for you and for our community that you've been able to do this. And you were telling me, and I want to talk about what you're doing with housing in a bit, but you were telling me that recently you were involved with an Advent study that maybe helped shape your current work. With Laura Birch and JB, who've both been on this program before, and maybe some others. But it had a provocative title called Keeping Jesus Housed. Tell us a little bit about that Advent study and how it kind of shaped your direction now.
It was so, talk about fortuitous. We'd actually started the housing effort probably about August, September, so that preceded this. But JB and Laura have been incredible advocates within our community and very active on the topic of housing justice. And Laura was familiar with the Good Neighbor movement, which actually put together this Keeping Jesus House Advent series. And Brandon Rencher, who used to be one of our former pastors, he actually was pastoring out at Blackburn Chapel is part of the Boone United Methodist Church group of pastors. He actually has moved and started this Good Neighbor movement in Greensboro. And the focus is on what they refer to as housing justice. And that is recognizing that we need to turn things on its head when it comes to being active as a faith community in terms of recognizing the needs of our neighbors, the many that are unhoused, that are vulnerable for different reasons, whether they have mental health issues, whether there may be some addiction issues, living in poverty, having a medical crisis that leads to being unhoused, and that how we've always approached housing, we really need to be challenged as members of the faith community in how we do things. It's one thing to be talking about it in the pews on a Sunday, but it's another thing to actually be out there actively engaging with and making change and focusing on how we do that change. One of the things I brought along the Advent series, and I was scanning it, and one of the things I loved, this was our first lesson, and this was the Litany, the call to confession, and the first speaker says, Jesus' parents traveled from home to home, shelter to shelter, inn to inn, trying to find a safe, warm place to welcome Jesus into the world. They said, please let us in, let us stay. And then the many responded. The homeowners, landlords, and nonprofit executives said to them, we need to see your W-2, your credit score, your pay stub, your medical history, and proof of U.S. citizenship first. And when does this baby due? We don't allow children here. And for me, with a social work background, I mean, we're known for having red tape in a lot of our nonprofit and government organizations. So it really helped to challenge me, not just in terms of my faith, but also in terms of my profession, in how we think about partnering with all of our neighbors.
Right. Yeah, and I think faith communities are generally responsive to the needs in the community. And it seems like they, by and large, do a good job with feeding the hungry and maybe taking care of the homeless. But it seems like there might be a gap here, particularly in our community, where families may be struggling to meet their housing needs. They're not homeless, but perhaps they can't afford safe and comfortable housing. Partly because the housing prices are so high in this community. What's your take on that? Are faith communities doing enough? Is there room for improvement? Can this be a refocus, in a sense, to direct more resources and attention toward the vulnerable people in our community who are struggling with meeting housing costs?
Absolutely. And I try to always take a strengths or asset-based approach, and I think it's an area for growth for faith communities. In fact, when we started the conversations back in August and September, I learned at that time there was a group that had just formed called the Affordables Group that actually is a group of interdisciplinary faith-based communities that are active and trying to become engaged in terms of purchasing land and actually building affordable housing. And so that was exciting. That was a concurrent effort to what we were starting at the same time. But it's to really think about being involved at such a much deeper level of involvement in terms of meeting and addressing the housing issues and needs of our communities.
Yeah, and we were talking about some statistics. Is in this community, and we know there are a lot of second home folks who live here, and we love them, but that tends to drive the price of housing up. And you were telling me that there's just, not only is housing expensive, but there's just not enough housing. Is there in Watauga and Ashe and Allegheny and in these western counties, is the need greater than elsewhere, say down in the Piedmont or in the Triad or Triangle area? Do you have a feel for that?
It is. In fact, we were really fortunate that at the same time we were starting these efforts, Bowen National Research just conducted a study, a needs assessment for the North Carolina Realtors Association as well as the High Country Realtors. And the 400-page report just came out about 2 weeks ago. So talk about timely with us doing this forum. But one of the things that just struck me was it turns out in the High Country region and in Watauga County, there's a 99.9% occupancy rate when it comes to houses as well as places for rent. And according to the researchers, 94 to 96% is considered a healthy market when you have that kind of occupancy level. So we're way over the level in terms of even having available rental housing or homes for sale. Not to mention when you actually start to talk about the quality of housing, that many stories have gone unheard of our community members who've been living in unsafe housing with sewage issues, with water issues. And one of the things we recognize is that only certain sectors, certain groups like nonprofits would be aware of those kind of issues among our neighbors. But the larger community isn't always aware of those. And so that was something else that came to our attention and was important for us to make sure those stories could be told.
And this is where the Housing Forum
This is
comes
for the
in.
forum.
Yeah, so tell us just a little more about the Housing Forum, your role in this, what's going to take place over the next few weeks, and what the goals are. What's the end game here?
Sounds good. And
Yeah.
you'll hear my enthusiasm brimming over.
I've already
so-
heard your enthusiasm. Yeah, this is what I love about what you're doing now.
So we started, we were having some one-on-one conversations. A colleague and friend and I were having one-on-one conversations. We were exploring the idea of potentially creating a nonprofit with a housing component, an income component, and a community center. So we wanted to talk with people who are already involved in those areas. People have been involved with housing issues for 25, 30 years to address affordable housing needs. And so we started talking to people. We started learning that there are a lot of groups and organizations who are committed and have been involved with the issue for a long time. Not everybody knows what are the assets and resources of these organizations, nor do they know the gaps of those. We learned that there are a lot of untold stories of people who have had very horrible lived housing experiences here in our community, and only a few people, usually those working with nonprofits, have heard those stories. We also learned that there was just a wealth of local housing data. So at the same time we were having these one-on-one conversations, the WCCI, two of our committees that have had addressing housing issues as a goal for 2 years, we combined in August and said, this is going to be one of our goals. We want to put it front and center, working with housing partners in the community. So I started asking folks, let's have a meeting to talk about first increasing the awareness among all of our community members, making a forum that's open to everyone, and sharing all of this information. So we had our first Zoom meeting, and anybody was welcome to join it, and we had 35 plus people for the first planning group meeting. Since then, we've grown to 70 plus people who are planning the forum. We are having 4 free sessions. You can either attend in person at the Watauga Community Recreation Center, will be one of the first community events to use that space. Or for those who are not comfortable attending, they actually can join by Zoom. The 4 titles are on Monday, March 14th from 5:30 to 8. We will have Safety of Housing will be the first forum. On Monday, March 28th, 5:30 to 8 will be Accessibility of Housing. On Monday, April 11th, 5:30 to 8 will be Affordability of Housing. And then the final session will be Monday, April 25th from 5:30 to 8:30, Potential Solutions. The general format we wanted to have centered at the beginning of every one of our sessions the story. So we will have videos of community members who have had experiences, negative experiences with housing related to that topic. We will then have some panel discussants who are also working with people addressing those issues. We'll take a break. We will have dinner provided by Farm Cafe and Stick Boy Kitchen.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we will share local housing data on data placements with everybody and have facilitated roundtable discussions about what folks have heard and starting to talk about identifying community priorities. And then the final session will actually be able to start talking about action planning as well as potential solutions. So you can tell I just bubble over.
Yeah,
about
and
this.
you've got all this information right at the tip of your tongue. And one of the things that I find, and we should be clear, this is not primarily a religious based or a faith-based program, but it's a real community partnership. So you have some faith-based programs and some like Habitat for Humanity who have faith-based in their history. But there's also other organizations. Maybe you could name a few who are kind of taking a leading role in this housing forum.
That's part of what's been so exciting. I mean, it really has been, it's a community-led, community-driven effort. We have the president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, David Jackson, has been with us since the very beginning. We have both the town planner, Jane Shook. We have the county planner, Joe Furman, involved with us. We have 4 town council members who've been attending the meetings regularly. We actually have Appalachian Regional Health System and one of the administrators, Amy Crabb, who we know very well. Dr. Elliott, superintendent of Watauga County Schools, another one of the large employers who are facing workforce housing issues, has been with us since the very beginning. We have staff from Hospitality House, Habitat for Humanity, WWAMI, Children's Council, Western Youth Network. It's just been incredible in terms of the range. And we have faculty from social work, sustainable development, public health, geography and planning, and we have student groups from all of those different disciplines that are involved with planning this effort. So it's just been so energizing.
That's amazing.
It is.
So if say a large church in the area or some other faith-based community wanted to play a more active role, would there be room for more partners?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things that we recognize, there was a significant affordable housing effort that went on about 25, 30 years ago. And so we are under no illusions about what it means to address the issue of housing. And we even have a more expanded population. We're talking about people with no, negligible, or low income to moderate income. So we're talking about a large part of the population that we really want to address housing issues for. So this is just going to be the start of the conversation. We really don't expect that things will end with the forum, but that will just actually set in motion and allow all of us who are able to be involved in the community in these discussions to start with the same level of awareness and information about what the issues are, what the assets and resources are, and then figure out how to move forward as a community and prioritize issues as a community.
And I know you went through a lot of dates and times. And we're going to try to get a website up on the screen here.
you.
But if people wanted to find out more about the forum or even want to be more involved, can you give us a website or some way that information could be shared in that way?
Absolutely, yes. And we actually, thanks to the Chamber of Commerce, purchased a website for us so it can be a landing site for us for whatever comes out of the forum. It's WataugAHousingForum.org. So WATAUGA housing HOUSING forum FORUM.org. And if they have questions, they also can reach me at Kelly@WataugAHousingForum.org.
Okay, great. Well, I'm sure and we'll get that up on the board too. Intentionality behind this. And when I talk about faith-based communities, and Habitat for Humanity comes to mind. I guess it's probably the most well-known faith-based effort to address housing needs. But the word intentionality comes to mind. So there needs to be probably more focused intention about addressing housing and not just general needs, poverty needs in the area. Is there a way that churches could start conversations or other faith-based communities could start conversations that would create that kind of awareness within faith-based communities and create a more intentional outreach program?
That's a great question, and I really have been impressed by this other group, the Affordables group I mentioned. An activist here in our community, Lynn Colthard, has started that effort, and I believe she is a member of the Episcopal Church. And what's been exciting about that effort is it has people from Boone United Methodists involved with it. It has people from Faith Bridge Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church. It has folks involved from St. Mary's, Rumpel Presbyterian. So there really has been an intentionality not just to stay within one denomination, but to actually start having a conversation across denominations, and also recognizing that a lot of faith communities also have a lot of property available that hasn't been used for community purposes. And so to really put our faith where our feet are in terms of thinking about using our assets and resources as a faith community and as a group of faith communities differently. Right. So I get really excited by that. And we have some of the same folks that are involved with the Affordables faith-based initiative also are involved with the Watauga Housing Forum. And so there has been discussion about starting up a nonprofit that will be focused as a community housing trust, which actually would be actively involved in purchasing land and repurposing land, and doing that with the faith communities all involved.
There's some big ideas here.
I know.
And I know that the housing forum is just the beginning, as you said, but look down the road. I mean, what would be your ideal outcome for these efforts if you're looking 5, 10, even 20 years into the future?
And it will be 5, 10, 20 years in the future.
This is a long-range effort.
It is. My goal and my hope for our forum is that we recognize that there's not one solution, and a solution that works here in Watauga and the high country is not going to work for other communities. But that as we start to recognize that to really build what we refer to on our website as a resilient and thriving community for all, that means that you really need to take into account all of your community members, all of your neighbors. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's going to mean that we're going to have multiple strategies. And I, in fact, hope that we'll have multiple strategies. There have just been some incredible potential solutions that have been coming to our attention as a part of this effort. There's, like I mentioned, the Community Housing Trust. There also are ways that you can actually develop and set action plans, long-term action plans, with a group out in California where they've been doing that in terms of actually targeting certain portions of building affordable housing as well as rental housing. There's repurposing. A lot of community development corporations repurpose existing apartment buildings and then target them for low-income apartment rentals. So there are many things that we can actually do. And I think it's going to take us having not just one solution, but multiple solutions to really try to move the needle and address needs. And once you start doing that for all of your neighbors, all of your community members, then everybody has a chance for being able to thrive.
Sounds like a real kind of golden rule sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, Kelly, I love your passion and your enthusiasm for this. I think it's a good focus for our community. I mean, all religions have built within them a concern for those who are in need in whatever way. So along with helping feed the hungry and house the homeless and providing health care and all these other issues that we care so much about, affordable, safe, and comfortable housing for all seems like one of those kind of basic human rights and human needs. And I thank you and all the partners who are working on this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I just so appreciate the opportunity to share this with you and your audience. We are just, I know I speak on behalf of the entire planning group, we are just so excited by the momentum that's been moving us forward, and we're looking forward to where it all goes.
Well, thanks. I hope people are watching this and will get excited about it and join your efforts.
Oh, thank you. And I definitely would love to hear from anyone who's interested in joining us.
All right. Well, thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for Religion and Life this week. I hope you'll join us next week on App TV as we continue to explore the role of religion and faith in modern society and culture. Until then, this is Ozzy Osbourne.